All right, let's get started. So, welcome to this session, to the introduction of deployment of Azure Data Factory and Azure DevOps with continuous integration and continuous deployment. First of all, thank you very much to Mike and Marco for having this opportunity to speak today at Data Saturday #1. First of all, I'll introduce myself. There you go. So my name is Eric Monchen. I am a team lead BI at Dimetrics Consulting Group. I'll tell you in the next slide a little bit more about Dimetrics. I am located in Munich, Germany. I am the chapter leader of the PaaS organization in Bavaria. So PaaS is divided into 15 different groups with a PaaS Germany on top of that. PaaS Germany is still for those who have been involved also with the PaaS Global organization. PaaS Germany is an independent community, so nothing has been affected by that. We're a healthy, registered community and keep continuing doing what we're doing. So I've been into the BI business since 2008, around 2008. Started with SQL Server, was back then 2005. And started off with the classic BI tools and moved to nowadays more in the direction of the cloud. And yeah, little fun fact, almost booked the trip to the wrong city for a SQL Saturday in the US. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I don't tweet that much, so once in a while, and LinkedIn, there's the link in case you're interested to connect. A little bit about what I'm doing. At Dimetrics, we are the leading solution provider for business intelligence and analytics in the field of marketing automation and campaign management. It's probably not in Italy the case, but in Germany, it's the case when you're registered to newsletters where you get vouchers. When you have birthdays, you get vouchers from all these shops and businesses and stuff like that. In Germany, we have a lot of customers who are using our marketing automation and campaign tools to target their customers when it comes to campaigns and newsletters. And we have a very complex BI structure and framework behind it, which is also all based on SQL Server. And yeah, we do this all from a single source. We do consulting. We have our own software to do the campaign management, and a very broad industry in our line of business. And thankfully, we are not affected by Corona that much because we are in in lots of different fields. In e-commerce and tourism, unfortunately, has dropped a bit with the Corona, obviously. We have a lot of large customers as well, large well-known customers in the German-speaking area. We have over 18 years of experience in more than 200 customers. All right. So before we get started, I'm interested to know a little bit about you guys, what your experience is in the combination of the continuous integration and continuous deployment in combination with the Azure Data Factory. So I've created a little poll here. You see on the top of the slide here, a little URL with a code, and I am actually wondering about what you guys, your experience with these tools. And yeah, if you all answered the answer on the right, or I think on the mobile, it's on the bottom. Then hopefully you can still learn a little bit here in my session. So I'll keep this on here for a minute so you can go to the URL. It should actually refresh itself. I've tested it out. this morning and had a bit of issues with it. So what I might want to do is switch over to the non-presentation mode. There are a few answers coming in. Norberto, totally new to it, great. And hopefully you can learn a lot. So I think, yeah, I need to refresh it here. This tool that I'm using actually does should actually refresh this in the presentation. It's very nifty and all, and but that's, for some reason it doesn't refresh automatically within the presentation. But I'm glad to see actually a few answers here. And there are a few more coming in. I won't refresh it. And I'm glad to see you've seen it. That's all. So that means that hopefully you can learn a lot today. Okay. So I'll go back to the presentation mode. And I will actually turn off my camera because that's not the most interesting thing to look at. You hear about the presentation, about the content, and I'm having a lot of demos, so I'll share all the demos with you as well. The agenda for today. First of all, I will explain the life cycle that Microsoft handles when it comes to Azure Data Factory in terms of the continuous integration and continuous deployment. This is actually based on one image. What I will explain. It is an important thing to understand and realize before you get started with the implementation in it. When I first worked with it, I didn't know about this lifecycle. I hadn't been introduced to it yet, and I've already started with the implementation, and I had difficult times with it. And then I learned about this lifecycle, how that's handled. Then it got all clear to me. So that's also why I want to start with that. Then I will move over to the to Azure Data Factory. A few settings and a few things that I've already set up because we only have 1 hour to discuss this. So there's a lot of things I already put into place. Obviously, I will tell you what I've prepared, what you'll have to do to set that up yourself. Then the other part is the DevOps part. I will go through the interface of DevOps and also explain you a few of the basics. And then it comes to the actual building of the continuous integration and building the continuous deployment. Those are two different things that can easily be mixed up together. Understanding the differences and understanding what's responsible for what makes that easier also to use it. And then at the end, I will explain how you can deploy customized templates. It's the obvious scenario where you're developing in a development environment. You're connecting against a development database, storage account, whatever, and you need to deploy it. And with the deployment, you have, of course, different databases that points to your production environment. And I will show you how this deployment, or how you will need to configure your deployment to make that happen, to also automate that. The one thing that I won't go in detail very much is in Azure Data Factory, for example, building pipelines. That's a topic of another session. I'm really focused on that stuff in Azure Data Factory that I've developed to deploy that and to get that ready for production. All right, so on the next slide, I have the continuous integration and continuous deployment lifecycle. This is an image that I took from the Microsoft website, from the documentation, that basically summarizes everything together. On the left side here, you see the Git part. On the right side, you see what's in Azure, and in the middle, it tells you about the release management. We're not covering the whole thing, or in my demo, I don't have the whole thing because this is the most, or like a very complex scenario where you're working with different branches and where you're working with a 3-tier environment. So you have a development environment, a test environment, and a production environment. Let's start here on the top here in Git. Basically, it's where you have your working branches. You have your regular working branches. So this is basically a standard development, or the way of development with Git. And you have your collaboration branch, in this case called the master branch. So basically, you're working on your, or when I'm working directly on my master branch, let's keep it simple for now. You publish whatever you need to publish, whatever is done, you publish this to your development Azure Data Factory. So what happens then? When you publish this, because I'm in my development environment, I'm creating my pipelines, creating my data sets, testing it out, so debugging it in this dev environment. And at some point I'm done, I can publish this, and Data Factory then creates or updates it, when you already have that, a publish branch. And this publish branch is called ADF publish. You can name that something else, but I highly recommend keeping that for ADF publish, because when you're also working with it later in more complex scenarios, you're trying to find information about it. Documentation always refers then to ADF, to the ADF publish branch. So my recommendation is to keep that same name. Within the release management is where you define your release. That's also what we're going to do. And when you create releases, so every deployment is called a release, either manual or continuously, or scheduling it. You release this and it's deployed to any environment you want to deploy that to. What we're going to do today is we are creating this release and deploy this to a production environment. One very important thing to keep in mind here is that in your production and test environment, you have no Git references, nothing at all. Here on your development, you're working against your Azure DevOps Git. In your test or production or any other environment where you're deploying it to, you don't have any Git reference. It's deployed to this environment, and it's pulled out of a template, out of this release, but it doesn't have this Git configuration that we're going to look at. Okay, if there's any questions, then you can put it in the chat. I think Mike is also keeping an eye on the chat, but we don't need to wait until the end. If you have burning questions, then I can answer them accordingly. All right. That's for the PowerPoint slides. I have one more slide for later when we're talking about parameters. But for now, it's demo time. I have one question: is this model also applicable on GitHub instead of Azure DevOps? Yes, it is. That is. We will see later where we're creating the releases or where we're setting it up. You can also create. You can also use a GitHub for that. That's no problem. All right. So for this demo, I'm using a few resources here that I have listed here on the screen. I have a data factory here, which is my development environment, and I have my production environment. I've also created 2 storage accounts. One is the data Saturday storage, data Saturday storage prod, same kind of thing. One development storage, one production storage. The storage accounts are actually only used to show you how to deploy and change your connection string when I want to deploy this, that I want to point to this other storage account and not the one that I'm developing on. So these are the 4 main resources that we're using. Okay, I've already have my data factory open. And what I have here is just a few simple things. I have a pipeline, which is just a demo pipeline that sets a variable. There's nothing else than that. But a few things that I want to show you here as just for these demo purposes is a variable in this package. And these variables are mail recipients. I have, for example, in my projects, I always have a pipeline that sends an email when the executions of pipeline has been successful or has failed. So in my pipeline, I have this mail recipient and mail recipient failure that I use. I have here, I get both emails, but I can say, okay, when it's success, go somewhere else. When it's failed, then I will get it. These are also the variables that we're going to use for the deployment, because when I want to deploy this, I want to have this set to someone else. I have my development environment. Yes, I want to receive emails when my development environment fails, but for production environment, for example, you want to have your customers informed when that has failed. So that's where we have this the separation. And also this pipeline, okay, it just sets a variable. It's a very simple thing, but I'm using a data set here also in this factory, which points to this linked server blob storage. And this blob storage goes to the storage account named data Saturday storage that I just showed. Okay. What else is important is the configuration here, because here I'm in my development environment, and you already see it here, up here on the top, you see main branch. In my settings, I have my Git configuration here. As you can see, I've already set that up. Repository type Azure DevOps Git. So when I set a new one here, I can also select GitHub here. I have an account. I already have a project. I created a repository. Collaboration branch is set to main. I think, Santosh, that also answers your question. If you can change the collaboration branch, that will be set with setting the configuration in the data factory here. And I have my ADF publish branch that I talked about in the lifecycle, and a root folder in DevOps where my data factory stuff will appear. So if I go to the settings right now, I cannot set much here because I've already set that. When you connect this to your Git repository, it asks you for these settings. It's pretty straightforward. So that's how you should be set to go to have your data factory linked to your Git. All right. How does that look like in DevOps then? In DevOps, I've already done also a little bit of preparation work. As you can see here, I have my project DevOps test, and I've created a repository, ADF repository in here. And I have also already run a few tests, so that's why I also see already the data factory here and a YAML file. This is actually something that I've not changed. I have developed my my data factory here, and with my deployment or with my publishing, as we saw in the lifecycle, it automatically publishes that in the ADF repository that is set in the settings, my folder data factory, and here in my data factory folder, I can see the pipelines. And this is the complete JSON definition then of your pipeline. You see here, it's I have one component, and here I have my variables that I showed set to these values. We'll look at these later when we change the parameters. So everything is here in my repository. What it also did when I connected to the Git configuration, it also created a build pipeline. And this build pipeline is basically every time I publish to this repository, it executes this build pipeline and has my branch then up to date. It publishes directly, in this case, to my main branch. I won't go into details with deployment of the different branches, with the pull requests and everything else. For this demo, it's I kept it simpler. But in this case, when I change anything, it basically executes this build pipeline, and it updates it then. So basically, what I can do is I change this, just the title change. And what I'm going to do here, I save it first. And when I save it here, I'm going to look at the repository here, what actually changed. Looking at the pipeline, demo pipeline, it already changed that, set variable for demo. So in the repository, it changes that already upon saving. It didn't affect the pipeline though. It already saved, it only saved that into the main branch, into the repository, but it hasn't built it yet. When I publish it here, I say, okay, go ahead, publish it, and then you can build it. It tells you the little summary about what it's going to build. And what you see here is a little comment here. The published branch is the branch in your repository where publishing related ARM templates are stored and updated. We'll look at the ARM template later. And you can see the publish branch, what I set in my settings, this ADF publish. I can go ahead and it publishes it. In this case, it goes very fast because I don't have much in here. And you already see here generating ARM templates. That's done. As I said, we'll look at the ARM template later. All right. I can refresh this. And it says here, recently run pipelines, ADF repository, just now. So it has updated this build pipeline. So basically, this is all to it in a simple way, of course, simple demo, what it is to build your pipelines in your Azure DevOps. I have not deployed anything yet. I have not released anything yet. That's what we're going to look at right now. Okay. Also under your pipelines, you have your releases. And in this case, I have one release. I call it release prod. You can have as many releases here as you like. You can have a test, a prod, a pre-prod, whatever you want to have it, a demo, as many as you like. And also, you're not restricted to have your limitations here. If you're working on a free tier or you don't have access to unlimited resources in or almost unlimited resources in Azure, building these or setting up these pipelines is you can do as many as you like. Okay, let's have a look and what is done here in this release. I go ahead here and say edit. Okay, when I edit this, there's two parts here. There's artifacts. Which artifacts am I using to deploy, and what stages? What are the steps that needs to be done to actually deploy this? Here, I'm going to go ahead here to artifacts. I can add artifacts, and also you can see here from GitHub, you can add your artifacts here and deploy that. I've already set that up here. I'll show the details here. So I select the project, the source, the repository, where does it come from, and the default branch, where does it need to be deployed from. Versions, and I need to give that an alias. This is also, I didn't change this. This was suggested when I created this artifact. Before I go into the tasks, I can define here when does it need to be deployed. When I go here onto this little lightning icon, I can actually say it needs to be continuously deployed. I can say enabled, and this means when I enable this, that every time when I publish something in the master, in this case the main branch, or not ADF publish, or when I publish this, it will be deployed. I'm not going to do that right now because I publish pretty often, and I don't want to have this release started every time. But you can also say, okay, I want to filter this. I want to exclude a certain branch or something. If you're working with many branches, you can say, okay, I want to deploy this, but not every time. I want to exclude certain branches. So you have here a good set of tools that you can continuously deploy your artifacts. I keep that disabled for now because I want to be able to start that deployment or start that release process myself. And with the deployment, I have my jobs here. I have one job and 3 tasks at this moment. I go into this tasks, and this is where I see my 3 tasks. First of all, before I go into the tasks in detail, I want to show you a few options. In the general options of the release, I have, for example, the ability to name the releases. By default, it's called release 1, release 2, etc. I've put a little extra with the date and time that these releases are named. I would just go back. You see here, these are the releases that are then automatically created based on these options. Okay. I'll go back into the deployment. And in this deployment here, this is where you add your steps. And to add the step, you can say add a task. And here you have a huge list of tasks. you can use. A few of these tasks are really recommended to use. For example, I don't have that in my 3 tasks right now because I don't have my key vault set up, but you can add your key vault here. You can connect to your key vault and say, okay, when I deploy, I want to use values from my key vault. Then, and with that, you don't need to put passwords and usernames, etc., in your deployment pipeline. So basically, when you add this, you can say add here. That's usually what you do at the beginning, and then you select here your subscription. And in this case, as I said, I don't have a key vault here. But you could point to your key vault and say certain secrets that I want to use or all. And when you do that, then you can use these secrets, passwords, usernames, connection strings, whatever is in the key vault, you can use that in further steps. Okay, so I'm going to remove this task again. I don't need it right now. Also, a thing about these tasks is I think I had that when I put key vault key in. It can, yep, exactly. There are tasks here that are built in, and there are tasks from Marketplace. These are third-party extensions. Until now, I've only used these standard ones. I haven't taken much time to look at the Marketplace extensions, but for now, I've actually I've done anything I needed to do with these standard tasks. For example, other tasks that I've used a lot is Azure functions, deployment of an Azure function. Another one would actually be just moving over files. You can say, okay, I want to copy a file that has some kind of deployment script or anything like that, and I want to copy that over, and I can just put add here, file copy, and I say, okay, my files are here and need to be deployed to another destination. It's also possible to change these files. I've had a case where I had in my development environment, I had configuration files with secrets in it, and in my production environment, these secrets were different. And you can say, okay, within my deployment, take this, in this case, it was a JSON file. Take this file, change the value into another secret, and deploy that. That goes a little too far for this presentation, but bear in mind these kind of things in your deployment are possible. All right, let's have a look at the task that we actually have in here. I have 3 tasks. The main task is actually in the middle here, ARM template deployment, Azure Data Factory. And there's a stop task here and a start task. Basically how that works is Azure Data Factory has triggers. If you have worked with the triggers, if you plan triggers, you deploy that and you actually deploy your triggers with it. What you do is when you have your triggers set to, okay, execute this every day at 7 o'clock, just like a SQL agent job, you deploy this. If you don't change anything, it deploys the triggers with it. So in your production environment, it will have the same schedule as your development environment. In your ARM template, which we're going to look at at the end, I can also show you how to change that. But if I only deploy this without stopping my triggers first on production, it might fail. It doesn't necessarily fail, but it could, because triggers could be active, and if a trigger is active, then it fails. So basically, what you do is, I have a little PowerShell script here that says stop my trigger first, and then do the deployment, and then start the triggers again. Before I go into the details, I want to show you the variables. And this variable basically makes it easier to define your tasks if things are changing, if values are changing. And in this case also, my data factory name, I have a different data factory name in my production environment, which is usually the case. So I have my data factory name as a variable, and I have release name and resource group name, because you could have different resource groups, you could have different subscriptions, anything for your production environment. Okay, back into the tasks, and I'll show you the stop ADF trigger task, and this is nothing more than a PowerShell script, and this PowerShell script is actually putting the triggers in a variable, and here is where you see where I'm using these variables. That's this part, starting with the $sign, and then between brackets you have your data factory name and then your resource group name. So this script does nothing else than fetch your triggers, and for each trigger, stop them. Exactly like this, you have the start script, and this is basically a copy of this script, but then it doesn't say stop, but it says start here. And the other thing is exactly the same. And here you already have your the advantage of using these variables, that when something changes, when you want to deploy this to a different data factory name, or the resource group changes, you only need to change that into your variables, and it's then also here. It's effective here. Okay. Then the main part actually of this deployment is the deployment of the Azure Data Factory itself. So basically I give it a name, I select my subscription, and Antonio, you said the name is spectacular. Yeah, I didn't create that myself. I got that for my colleagues. And what am I doing here? I'm creating or updating a resource group, setting these default values. And this is actually where I say, okay, where is my template located? Because what I'm actually deploying is this ARM template that Data Factory created for me. So basically with this publishing, yes, it published the artifact, but it also created this template that is used when I'm doing this deployment. And when I go into here, I browse here, I don't have many options to select from, so I can't do much wrong here. I have my ARM template here that I select. That's automatically created with when it was published. Template parameters. That's the same thing. There are a standard set of parameters. I got the same tree here, and I set my parameters. This is the part where it actually say override template parameters. Here's where I can say, okay, on development I used this and this, in this case, storage account, data factory name, etc., connection string to a different resource. And when I deploy this, I want to override this with a different, in this case, connection string. You see here a bunch of code, but I can click on here on this menu, and it searches for templates to override. And then I can say factory name. I can use these variables here again. So I'm using the variable that I set up here. And this Azure Blob Storage connection string is what I can change here. So this is what I just changed here. Now the question is, how does Data Factory know which parameters to override? Because here, this connection string, I got that here automatically. And the question is then, okay, when I want to override more things, how do I do that? And as you might remember from the beginning, I have this this pipeline where I put these email addresses in it. And I want to do the same thing with deployment here, and then changing these email addresses, but it's not in the list here. There's two things I can do here. I can add that here, but that's not very, yeah. I need to know how it's called, how these variables are called, and that's not something that's easily guessed. So I need somehow to tell a data factory, okay, I want to have a few more things in here. This is where the ARM template parameter comes in. And I could deploy this right now, but I'm going to wait until the end because the deployment takes also a few minutes. And I go back into my data factory. In my settings, I go to my ARM template. This actually has moved. Before I could click on here on the top here, ARM template, but then it already says ARM template has moved to the Manage hub. So it's under Manage, ARM template, and then here, Edit Parameter Configuration. I click on here, and this is actually a part that where a little bit of coding is required. What you see here is actually all parameters that are configurable. And for example, when I go into connection string, here you can see that under linked services, you see under connection string, you see here a bunch of code here. Most of the things have this equal sign, and it says connection string is something else. This is actually telling that the value of the connection string from the linked service needs to have a different value. And this is the code that tells you whenever I edit these or override these templates, whenever I go in here, in this menu here, it looks in this template parameter or this template file to look, okay, which are the things that I can change or that I need to change. And as you can see here, a few things are standard in here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to add something, and I'm going to do that here. Because here you see the definitions of the pipeline. And remember, we're editing a parameter or a template file here. We're not editing the pipeline itself, but we're editing the template parameter. Okay, what am I going to put in here? I'm going to copy that from a script that I already have. So I'm going to replace this with the following code. What does it say here? The properties. Under properties, I have my activities, type properties, URL, and under variables, I have mail recipient and mail recipient failure. And how do I know how to build up this code? This is something that I just duplicate this this window, and I go in here. Let's let that load. While that is loading, I'll go back in here. Basically, what I say here is I want to have control over these variables. I want to set the default value different. And what I need to do here.
Sorry, Eric. We have a few questions in the chat. When you would like to answer, just consider we have less than 15 minutes. Thank you.
Yep. Looking at the question, I'll get back to that in the last couple of minutes, if you don't mind. Then I can finish this up in exactly the time that I have, and then I can quickly go over these questions. Okay, so this part is built up of 3 parts, separated by this this character here. Let's see if this is loaded. Yep. I go into my pipeline, and I go into the code of my pipeline. And this is the JSON code of the pipeline itself. And here I see how I need to use this. I need to use exactly this tree in my parameter configuration. So what does it say here? Whenever I deploy, first of all, this part I want to say when it says equal, it says I want to use by default the value that's in it. In this case, the value of the variable. So it'll show up as this string with my email address in it. As you can see here with the minus, it says I don't want to have a default value. When I select that in my parameters, I want to have an empty value that I need to fill out. Between this, so the second value is if I want to give this a different name. Starting with the minus to shorten it and give it a different name. I'll just leave that empty for now. Then it gives the name of the whole tree. And the third part is I need to set the type of the variable. Okay, so I say okay, I have this configured. And in this case, I need to publish it again because I need to have this ARM template reconfigured. There's no pipelines, no data set to be published, etc. But I can just hit OK. And this ARM template is recreated. Publishing is complete. ARM templates are being generated. And in this case, I can go to overriding my templates. And here it pops up with these 2 values. And I can change it here. Don't need to change it. I can leave it as it is. I'm not sure why it adds here another bracket, but I can just say, okay, it needs to have this value. And I can put a different value in here. Okay, so it adds that to this code. I save my release. And the final thing I'm going to do here is actually create the release itself. So I have defined my release here. And when I go back into all my pipelines, you see I have 2 releases here. I deleted the rest. I had more. The last one has been is the current release. And if I set that to automatically release, it would have released twice now because I published it twice. But I can also say create the release myself. It comes from the deployment trigger, and you can give that a description. Artifacts are given here. You can put that to a different version if you like. I'll leave that as it is, and I can say create. And it has created a release. Not deployed yet. For some reason, I'm not sure why yet. When I do this, it's not automatically deployed. It should also be deployed automatically. But in this case, I actually need to hit the button and say, okay, deploy it. And what it does here is it fetches an agent and executes this deployment. And this is actually where costs could occur. So when you do a deployment, this is the part where you're tapping into your resources, your Azure resources, to do the deployments. If you're not using it much, then you will never ever come to the limits. But bear in mind that this is tapping into your resources. So what it does here, it goes through all the steps. And if I configured everything correctly, it'll stop the triggers at this point, does the deployment, and start that again. So it could happen that that these jobs are also waiting into a queue. For example, we have many jobs that runs every day. Today is Saturday, so there's not much going on. So an agent was available right away. But don't be surprised if you need to wait for an agent that's available. Okay, in this case, it goes pretty fast. It's deployed. And what I can already show you, oh, it's finished. Here, I'm in my production environment. When I refresh this production environment, I have my pipeline in here, same pipeline, it's deployed. And when I look into here, I have my variable, the package or the pipeline variable, it's configured to test. All right. I have one more slide to show you, which is also available on the Microsoft documentation. Setting these ARM template parameters. I told you it's about this value is also separated into 3 different parts. And these are the parts that I just discussed. So action, name, and type. In the action, you can have the equal sign. It means it needs to keep the current value as a default value. The minus means don't keep it, get an empty value, and you need to configure it yourself. And the pipe symbol is a special case for Azure Key Vault connection strings. Then the name of the parameter, blank, you just get the name. If you start that with a minus character, the name is shortened, so it might be a little easier to read. If I quickly go back in here, I go to edit, into the tasks, override the template parameters. You can see here the name is quite long. Demo ADF, pipeline properties, variables, mail recipient failure. You can put a custom name in it. And S-type is type of parameter. So blank is string, and then you have a few supported values in here. All right, that brings me almost exactly on time to the end of my presentation. I see there are a few questions, so I'll go to these questions. Before that, if you want to get ready for your next presentation, I would like to thank you for your participation and hope to see you again soon. So we have questions from Santosh is still open. Do we need to stop triggers in main branch before publishing in dev? You might need to, because the triggers can be activated or not activated. Usually the triggers that are not activated, or usually triggers that are used in development, are not activated. You can start them yourself, and if they're not activated and you want to deploy that or publish that into your dev, then it's all right, because they're not activated. You will never get into the situation that you want to deploy to your development and a trigger is running, because they're not activated anyway. Okay, then Antonio, is it possible to select only some items to deploy instead of using the ARM template for the whole data factory resource? For instance, only a pipeline and related data sets. That, yes, it is possible. It's a little tricky to configure that. Let me see if I can quickly show you. There are, you have the possibility to have versions. Yeah, there's different way you can go about it, because you also have the possibility to use a different branch. And that's, I haven't been into that situation, but I would say I would recommend to use different branches for that, because then you can also add the artifacts here. And let me think. Yeah, it's not possible here to filter that, which artifacts you're using and which are not. So in that case, I would actually recommend using different branches for that. Do I use build pipelines for the deployment? Yes, I do. And so what it does here, well, in that case, yes and no, because I'm using the build pipelines, what I have here. What I'm actually deploying is the ARM deploying from the ARM template. I have a build in the pipeline, but what I release here, what I release in the deployment, when I go into the settings, is basically the ARM template. So basically, I deploy what's from the template. All right, having said that, then again, thank you for your participation, and enjoy the rest of the day with the rest of the sessions, and hopefully see you again soon.
Hi, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Hi, Eric. Can I put more one question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I was me who asked a question about the build pipelines, because this is an open question about the deployment of the data factory. For some cases, you don't need, because it's the build. The artifacts are the same as the ARM template. And one situation that I thought about that was to keep one version of the ADF for the release.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it's one how to keep, for example, one SQL server and the ADF synchronized, and then you create the build on the same pipeline, and you keep both synchronized. Because then you have in mind that when you deploy the ETL, the ADF, you also deploy the SQL server. This is one situation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do actually. If I sorry for interrupting. I do actually need to make room for the next speaker, because we're on the same track in the same room. So.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. If you have further questions, just don't hesitate to send me a message, and then we can chat about that.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
All
Bye.
right. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Mike.